Alright guys, this week we don't have a matchup for you because I have tests and Colin has tests, so I thought I'd do a quick deck tech on my dream deck. Now, let me preface this with, this is not my dream deck as in my, you know, my ultimate goal to build this deck, but no, this deck, the concept, came to me in a dream, actually. The original commander. So this is EDH. If you don't know what EDH is, it's Elder Dragon Highlander. Excuse me, Highlander. Elder Dragon Highlander, and it's a multiplayer format. It's tons of fun. I'd look it up if you have friends who play casual Magic. This is a really fun multiplayer format. Anyways, so the original commander that I had in my dream was let's see here, where is he? Was Jared Golgari Lichlord, and I just had this idea that as the commander, and then you'd put a bunch of creatures in the graveyard, and then you bring all those creatures back, and this is around the time that I was trying to build up my legacy dredge list, and so I had dredge on the mind, and then I have a living end modern deck, and so together I was thinking, oh, dredge plus living end type effects, and make a commander out of that. And so once I started to build it, I realized that Sidisi Blood Tyrant was actually a lot better for the job, just because having access to blue in a dredge deck is really awesome, because for those of you who don't know what dredge is, it reads, so a card has dredge and X. It's like dredge 1, 2, whatever, X. And if it's in your graveyard, if you would draw a card, you instead put that card from your graveyard, the card with dredge, into your hand, and then you put the number of, so you put X cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. So this card in particular has dredge 2. If it's in your graveyard, you put it in your hand if you would draw, and then put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Seems kind of weird and kind of bad, but it really gets this deck going. It really synergizes with a deck that wants to have a bunch of stuff in the graveyard. And it means that you can use things over and over again. So this is a land, so obviously, it's not going to end up in the graveyard often, hopefully not, but dredge is also on creatures and on sorceries and instants and everything like that. So let me start with Sidisi. He's a 4-drop 3/3, 1 green. Well, you can see that. Anyways, so when he enters the battlefield or attacks, the attacks is kind of weird, but you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. That's his first effect. And then his secondary effect is whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from the library, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into the battlefield. So this is a really well designed card, in my opinion, because the abilities on the card synergize, but they're phrased in a way that they will be synergistic with other cards. For example, dredge. So back to why blue is so great. If a dredge card is in your graveyard and you have instant speed draw, so let's see here, that would be Mental Note, Think Twice, Thought Scour. I really should have Gitaxian Probe in here now that I think about it. Still a work in progress. But if you have instant speed draw and Sidisi's out, or any other card that interacts with the graveyard, you can, instantly dredge 2. Because it says whenever you would draw a card, not just when you draw a card at the beginning of your turn. It's just whenever you would draw a card, you can do this. So you can trigger Sidisi's second ability off of the dredge if a creature gets put into the graveyard when you dredge 2. So that's really awesome. And then, of course, the first ability just allows him to trigger his second ability. He's not just kind of a 3/3 with this weird secondary ability that only gets triggered, and you have to build around him. He works with himself. He self synergizes and then allows for synergizing with other stuff. So I really like the design of this card. Enough with my soapbox. Let's get to the creatures. So I'll try to not linger too much on each of these creatures, but we'll start with Architects of Will. So it's a 3/3 for 4, and when it comes into play, you look at the top 3 cards of target player's library, so you can target yours or their library, and it has Cycling 1. Cycling is instant speed, and this says discard this card from your hand, draw a card. So this can trigger Dredge, which will then trigger Sidisi. So this is kind of in here for the instant speed draw, but what's cool is since this deck interacts with the graveyard anyways, putting creatures in your graveyard is also advantageous to the whole synergy of the deck. So, Ashen Ghoul. It's a 3/1 for 4, and it has haste. But if you pay 1, you can return it from your graveyard to your battlefield, and you can only do this during your upkeep, and only if there are 3 or more creatures above Ashen Ghoul. So, because EDH is technically an internal format, yeah, because you have access to almost all cards. There's a small ban list. The order of the graveyard matters. Now, if you're playing Modern or if you're playing Standard, the order of the graveyard does not matter. But if you're playing Legacy or Vintage, it does, because cards like this exist. There's another card in here that has the same thing. But this is really cool because if you're milling yourself, you're dredging yourself, and you're putting creature cards into the graveyard, having creatures that can come back is really a key component of this deck. Avatar of Woe, fantastic card, and this is really synergistic with putting a bunch of creature cards in your graveyard. So it says that if you have 10 or more creature, or if there are 10 or more creature cards in total all the graveyard, so you know, it's a very good card for EDH in general, but it costs 6 less. So it's a 2 black, 6/5 with fear, and it taps to destroy target creature, and it can't be regenerated, which is just amazing. It's like insane. This card is insane for EDH. For other formats, maybe not so much, but for EDH, I love this card. Well, I love the card anyways, from my heart. Bloodsoaked Champion, another guy that can come back from the graveyard. You have to attack first to get him back from the graveyard, but a 2/1 for 1 black is still good because you want to have stuff that you can do before Sidisi comes out. Boneyard Worm is an XX. Oh, well, my 6th edition is showing. Is a star. Wait, do they do XX now? Wow, I'm having trouble. They do a myriad of things. Well, Boneyard Worm is a star, where the power and toughness is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this can be really, really strong because he's a 2-drop, or he can be a nice little thing to have out early that will get bigger very quickly. A cool thing about him, though, is if you instant speed Dredge and get more creatures in the graveyard, he gets pumped at instant speed. So if you have an Architects of Will in your hand and he's attacking and you block, you can take the risk of dredging and seeing if you can pump him. So I thought that was cool. Brawn, crazy card for this deck. As long as he's in your graveyard and you control a forest, which you most likely will, creatures you control have trample. So he's one of the creatures that you just want in the graveyard. I mean, having him on the field is fine as well, because then your opponent doesn't really want to block it or kill it, because then all your other creatures get trample. But he's the kind of card that you dredge into and you get a 2/2 zombie and it has trample now. So it's really, you know, that's the card you're looking for. This guy, kind of weird. I'm kind of on the fence about him. He's one of the first guys that I would consider taking out, but his ability is so bizarre, and I like bizarre abilities, but it's also really good for the deck. So it says all nightmares get +1/+1. That comes into play later. Pay 3 black, pay 3 life, put target creature card from a graveyard, not just your graveyard, into play under your control. That creature is black and is a nightmare in addition to its other creature types. And then when he dies, all the nightmares get removed from get exiled. So he's really cool, and he allows me to get creatures that I want on the field back from my graveyard, or I can take advantage of other people's graveyards. So 5-drop is kind of gross, but sometimes we can cheat out creatures for less than that. Okay, so here is one of the dredge cards. He's dredge 2, and when you dredge him, or if somehow he is put into your hand from the graveyard, you gain 2 life. He's mainly in here just for the dredge, although he's a decent little creature. Golgari Grave Troll, the famous dredger. If you've heard of Dredge, you've probably heard of him. He is a 5-drop 0/0, but he enters the battlefield with 1/1 counters equal to each creature card in your graveyard. This can be a huge bomb, but I think in this deck, the strongest part of him is the Dredge 6. Because the likelihood of you hitting a creature within those 6 cards is very, very high. So if you can dredge him, you have an extremely high chance of hitting your triggers. Golgari Thug, dredge 4, so also really strong, but he's a 2-drop, so you can play him before Sidisi. And when he dies, you put a creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. So this can really change things up. In fact, I'm pretty sure, tell me if I'm wrong, but he can put himself on top of the library. Because when he dies... No, because he dies, and as he's dying, that trigger resolves before he goes to the graveyard. I believe that's how that works. I'm not 100% sure. But most of the time, you want him in the graveyard anyways, because Dredge 4 is also amazing. Dredge 6 is kind of unheard of. That's really way up there. Gravespawn Sovereign, another one that I'm really kind of on the fence about. I don't run a lot of zombies in the deck, except for the zombies that Sidisi makes. So this is important because you tap 5 untapped zombies and you put a creature card from a graveyard, again, a graveyard, not just yours, into play under your control. So it can be really, 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 really strong if you just have a bunch of zombies. But if you already have a bunch of zombies, you might not want to be doing that. It's hard to say. This is one I'm on the fence about. I'm still building it. So let me know what you think, of course. Greater Moss Dog, another good dredger, good body. A 3/3 for 4 is not great, but Dredge 3 is pretty necessary. Jared, again, he gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, so another guy who can get pumped by dredging. He puts creatures into the graveyard with his second ability, which is that you can sacrifice another creature, and each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And that was one of the key things that I had in my mind when I was dreaming about this deck, is that you get a bunch of creatures back with sorceries or instants or whatever, and then you sacrifice them, and then you can bring him back from the graveyard so that you don't have to keep paying a higher commander cost. And he fit really well, but I needed the blue, and plus Sidisi is also another really great card. This is one of the funniest cards in the deck. I don't know why this card exists. This card makes thematically 0 sense to me. So it's a 3/4 for 5 human rogue, and when they attack, you put wolves into play for the number of tapped and attacking for creature cards in your graveyard. So I guess the zombies, this is from Innistrad, so the zombies turn into wolves when these guys attack. They're breaking free the wolves that... Why is it creature cards in your graveyard? I think they were trying to design a card that was trying to make graveyard matter, because it was Innistrad and graveyard did matter. I don't know. This card is funny, and I really like this card, but it doesn't thematically makes little sense. Lurgoyf, the older, uglier brother of Tarmogoyf. And its power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and then the toughness is +1. So he's a 4-drop, which is kind of a little bit gross, but he doesn't... If someone plays Rest in Peace, he doesn't die, which is nice. Or if I living end and there are no creature cards, well, I guess other people's creatures. Well, anyways, there's a lot of ifs and buts and a lot of butts in EDH. That's why you should play. Lotless Troll, must have for a graveyard deck. This is, oh man, it allows so much because it's second. So the second ability says, first off, trample. I guess trample's the French vanilla, so that's not even like a first ability. Never mind. You discard a creature card, you put a 1/1 counter on Lotless Troll. So if you have Lurgoyf or any of the other guys, Jared, in play, instant speed, no mana pump for these guys, plus instant speed, no mana pump for the Lotless Troll as well, and he has a regenerate. Like, what is even going on? The only problem is that he does make you lose a lot of cards, but you want them in the graveyard anyways, so it's like you're not even losing them. Ta-da! This guy's pretty cool. He came out recently-ish. Favor Forged. I guess it's still kind of recent. But you can cast him from your graveyard, so just that's the main thing. If you control a black or a green permanent, but if you have Sidisi out, that's no problem. So he's just a guy that you are okay with going to the graveyard because you can play him again if you need him. He's a 2/1, but he can't be blocked or blocked. But yeah, whatever. Another 4-drop guy who cares about creatures in all graveyards, but he's got regenerate. So there's a lot of these guys, and I had to like choose which ones I wanted the most. And the 4-drop guys that had extra abilities were some of the ones I kept. As far as the ones that cared about graveyard creatures in graveyards. Narcomoeba, big legacy player in Dredge, and he's funny because he also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But when he is put into the graveyard from your library, you can put him on the battlefield. Weird. It's a very weird card. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird card. but if you dredge him, he comes out into the battlefield, which is cool because you just get a free creature. Necroplasm. He's a little bit of a non-bow with Sidisi, so he's complicated. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a 1/1 counter on him. He's a 3-drop 1/1. He's got Dredge 2, so that's a big reason why he's in the deck. But at the beginning of the upkeep, you put a 1/1 counter on him, and then at the end of your turn, you destroy each creature with converted mana cost equal to the number of 1/1 counters on Necroplasm. So the reason he's a non-bow with Sidisi is that if you play him after Sidisi has come out and made a bunch of zombies, you play him, and at the end of your turn, you destroy all creatures with converted mana cost equal to 0, which is all your zombies. So he kind of clashes with Sidisi, but the Dredge 2 is really important, and if you play this guy early, it's pretty effective board wipe. It's slow, it happens over time, it happens slowly, and he doesn't hit Sidisi, he doesn't hit anything above 3, because he ends up destroying himself, which is funny. But then you get him back with Dredge, so that's cool. Nether Shadow, the other guy that cares about the order of graveyards, mainly yours, but you can so instead of having to pay 1 to bring him in, if 3 or more creature cards are above him, he just comes in. You just put him in play, which is cool. Night Howler, another one who cares about creature cards in the graveyard. He's cool because he's a 3-drop, so he's less, but also he can bestow, which is really, 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 really strong for this deck, at least. And bestow just means that he can be an aura, which will then give the enchanted creature +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards, blah, blah, blah. Nyx Weaver, another good guy to have out because, okay, so if you have Sidisi out and you have Nyx Weaver out, excuse me, he can trigger Sidisi every single turn because at your upkeep you put the top 2 cards in your library. Now, a weird thing about Sidisi is that if more than 1 creature card is put into your graveyard during a single milling, only 1 zombie comes out. So they have to be separate instances of milling. So like if the Nyx Weaver puts 2 creature cards in your graveyard, you still only get 1 zombie. But then if you go and dredge after that, you get another zombie. So it's not... They did that for a very specific reason, is so that you can't just suddenly get, like, if you dredged the Golgari Grave Troll and you don't suddenly get 6 creatures, which would be awesome, but too strong for standard. Phyrexian Delver, he's pretty cool. He's a 5-drop 3 true. Man, I am just stumbling on my words today. 5-drop 3/2 that comes into play with a creature from your graveyard. So he brings a guy in. You do lose life equal to that creature's converted mana cost, so you don't want to bring in like Avatar of Woe, which is 8. Ugh. But he's 5 for 2 guys, and you put a lot of guys in the graveyard anyway, so you have access to a lot of your creatures. Rot Farm Skeleton, he's just another guy you can he triggers Sidisi, so you pay 4, you put the top 4 cards of your graveyard from your library into your graveyard, and then you can return him from your graveyard to the battlefield. So he does both. He does the 2 things that you want. He puts stuff from your library to your graveyard, and he can come back himself. So that's cool. Wayfinder, another guy who he's just great. He just does a lot of things that you want, but he triggers Sidisi. Sewer Nemesis, another 4-drop guy that cares about cards in the graveyard. And then he has this weird thing. Okay, so you choose a player when he enters the battlefield, and whenever the chosen player casts a spell, that player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So normally you would choose someone else and then try to like mill them out, I guess. I don't know, but you choose yourself in this situation because you want to mill yourself. So the end. Shambling Shell, Dredge 3. That's the main thing about him. This guy, though, this lady, yeah, she's a scary lady. A Praetor. She's the Black Praetor. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. It's amazing. It's for 7, but you can cheat it out. So that card this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. Splinter Fright. Another guy who cares about graveyards, but he also costs 3, so that's good. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, so he triggers Sidisi. Stinkweed Imp is just a 5-drop dredge guy with kind of death touch. I don't know. He's got death touch, basically. Street Wraith. So this guy's really cool. He's used in the Living End deck. You gotta run 4 of them. And he's cool because you can cycle, which is the discard and then draw, but you pay for it with life. So that's really important because you can tap out and then they can think that you have no way to pump your creatures, but then you can. So, the end. Yeah, that's why it's good. Vengeful Pharaoh. This guy's kind of weird. I may or may not take him out. He's got a lot of flavor. I'll give him that, but it's weird. It's weird flavor. Whenever combat damage is dealt to you or a planeswalker you control, if Vengeful Pharaoh is in your graveyard, destroy attacking creature, then put Vengeful Pharaoh on top of your library. So it's like he puts a curse on the creature that did damage, and then he comes back. You know, he like resurrects himself. So really weird. Wander, also equally as just amazing card because you want this in your graveyard, and oh man, this is okay. Basically, if you have an island and he's in your graveyard, creatures you control have flying. It's amazing. So all your zombies that come off Sidisi have flying. The lands aren't really super interesting. Okay, I'll go over some of the interesting one. Bojuka Bog is just there if you need to deal with someone else's graveyard. This one's interesting. So you pay 2. It's like a Nykthos, but for black creatures in your graveyard. So you pay 2 and you tap it, and you add a black mana for each black creature in your graveyard. So that can net you a lot of mana. This is the Dredge land, just some tap lands, some panoramas, evolving wilds. Ghost Quarter is pretty good. Ghost Quarter has some synergy with another card that we'll get back to. Guild Gates, panoramas, tap lands. This is sort of a panorama. You go and you get 2 lands. Also has some synergy with another card that we'll talk about later. Triland's great. Alright, this guy, for 5 mana, he's a man land that becomes he becomes a star where they are the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So that's kind of cool. Man lands are great. And then Urborg, of course, because yeah, why not? Instance. Dark Blast. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Dredge 3. The Dredge 3 is great. The fact that it's a 1-drop, great. Because you want to be dredging, all the time. So if this is in your opening hand, you can kill their Elvish Mystic, their Llanowar Elf, their Birds of Paradise, whatever. And then you get it back. And you just keep doing that. And you can just keep dredging. Just dredge forever. Dredge until the cows come home. Ghastly Demise. Interesting card. I like it a lot. Not sure if it's as good as I think it can be. But I haven't play tested this completely. I mean, I've goldfished. I played by myself, but I haven't played against other people. So this destroys target non-black creature if its toughness is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. Cards, not creature cards. So with Dredge, you can get a bunch of cards in your graveyard, and it's a 1-drop kill spell. So that's cool. That's great. Gnaw to the Bone, one of my favorite cards in my Living End deck, solely because Colin plays Burn when we go to Modern, and he hates this card because the flashback makes it so much worth it. It's so worth it. Everybody runs Brindle Boars, and I'm like, man, I gain like 3 times that much life off of a Gnaw to the Bone. Albeit sometimes you do want the body, but whatever. I love this card. It's great. And the flashback is really important in case you accidentally dredge it. You can cast it anyways. Grizzly Salvage. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You put a creature or a land from them into your hand, and then you put the rest in the graveyard. Triggers Sidisi, gets you what you want. Great stuff. Mental Note is a Thought Scour, except you can't target another player, but with Thought Scour you're going to target yourself anyways. But you put the top 2 cards of your library in your graveyard, and then you draw a card. It's a little cantrip. Triggers Sidisi and can draw dredge cards. Song of the Damned is like that land I showed you earlier, but it's just a ritual, black ritual, not dark ritual. Think Twice. 2-drop cantrip, and this is in here because it's instant speed draw, and it has flashback. So 2 iterations of instant speed draw, and if it gets dredged, you can still cast it anyways. And then Thought Scour we already talked about. Sorceries. Buried Alive is a cheaper Entomb, but you do it for 3 creatures. So if you don't know what Entomb is you search your library and you put them in your graveyard instead of into your hand, like a normal tutor would. Commune with the Gods is reveal top 5, choose an enchantment or a creature and put the rest in your graveyard. Trigger Sidisi. Dredge Return, great. Got flashback, and it's a reanimate. So you can cast it twice, or if it gets dredged away, you can use it again. Elephant Resurgence. Now, this card is not necessarily the best for this deck, but there's no way I could turn down this card, because look at that elephant. Look how sad he is. Look at that sad elephant. There's no way I could say no. Is that that's an elephant, but that doesn't really look a lot like an elephant. Now that I look at it, it's got small ears and a really, really small trunk. I guess maybe they're rotted away? No idea. Anyways, everybody gets a creature that has power and toughness equal to the number of creature cards in its controller's graveyard. So if you have Bajuk Bog, you can kill their elephant. Or if you play this on turn 2, it's a high chance that they won't have any creatures in their graveyard, and that you will. and or turn 3 or whatever, and then they just their guys will die, and you will still have yours, and it's great. Exhume is also really good because the chance that they'll have creatures in their graveyard that they want is very, very low, whereas the chance that you have creatures in your graveyard that you want is very, very high. So it's each player brings a creature back from the graveyard. Jared's orders is you search up for 2 creature cards, you reveal them, you put one in your hand and one into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library. 4-drop tutor, but because of the way this is phrased, it goes from the library into the graveyard because you search for the 2 cards, you reveal them, and they're in this sort of they're in the revealed zone, but that doesn't really count. I'm pretty sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they go to your they go from your library to your graveyard, so it can trigger Sidisi. Life from the Loam. Okay, this is the card that I was talking about that I was going to come back to those lands later. So all the panorama, I'll explain Life from the Loam first. You return up to 3 target lands from your graveyard to your hand, and then it has Dredge 3. So you can keep getting cards from your graveyard to your hand, land specifically. So that keeps your land count in your hand high, and it keeps you from missing land drops. And this is important because you have stuff like the panoramas, which is you sacrifice it and you go get one of the 3 shard lands. That's shard, right? Yeah, it's shards. And then you have stuff like Ghost Quarter, which it sacrifices itself to destroy another land, but then you can get it back with Life from the Loam. And then same with like Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds or all these cards. So there's a lot of lands that kill themselves that can get gotten back. My English are good. Life and Death. You have to rotate your head a little bit. This mainly you use for the death side of it, and you just return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Can be very, very important because you might just want one of these guys back. Living Death. The lesser known younger brother of Living End. Now, Living End is not actually in this deck because it's not good on its own. It has to be comboed into. Living Death is just the hard cast version of it, and you hard cast it for 1 more mana. So for those of you who don't know how Living End or Living Death works, everybody takes all creature cards in their graveyard and puts them in exile. Then everybody sacrifices all creatures. Then everybody takes all the creature cards that were previously exiled and puts them into play. So it's a big switcheroo. Creature cards in the graveyard go to the battlefield. Creature cards on the battlefield go to the graveyard. But you can't phrase it like that because then you just end up with all your creature cards in the graveyard. Anyways, Regrowth. This card is actually this card and I think there's a couple other cards like this is really important because sometimes you can't. There's spells instants or sorceries or enchantments or artifacts, non-creatures that you want that you can't get back because all of your reanimate spells are for creatures only. So this is important. Rise of the Dark Realms. Crazy, insane card. 9-drop is the only mana cost that I would have it at because this is insanity. But you put all cards from all graveyards into your control. The end. The game over. Stitched Together is really cool. It's a 2-drop reanimate if you have Threshold. If you don't, it goes to your hand, but you're going to have Threshold. So 2-drop reanimate, and you don't lose life, so that's awesome. Taigan Scheming is another look at the top 5. Choose something or other, and then... actually, this one's different because you can put any number of them into your graveyard and then put the rest back on the top of your library. So actually different. And this is good because if you want to keep all those cards, you can still trigger Sidisi by just picking 1 creature and putting it in the graveyard. Tracker's Instincts, another reveal this, pick this, but it's got flashback. So very good. Treasure Find is a lot like Regrowth. But Treasure Find gets exiled, so that's whatever. Unearth is a just what is it called? Not regenerate. I was just saying this word 2 seconds ago. But it brings it back, but only if its converted mana cost is 3 or less. It's got cycling, so that can be used. It's cycling for 2, so not as strong. And most of the time, you just want to actually have it for later. Victimize. This is a really cool. I like the way this works. So you choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. You sacrifice a creature, and then you bring the other 2 back. A lot of flavor here, and really easy to use in this deck because you make a bunch of 2/2 zombies that you don't need anyways. So it's just get 2 creatures back for 3 mana, which is insanity. That's so good. That's like the most value ever. Dread Bridge Chant. That's a tongue twister. This is another one that I've seriously considered taking out just because it's 6 mana, but it's crazy because okay, so when it comes into play, you put the top 10 cards of your library in your graveyard. There's no way that you're okay. There is a way, but high chance that you're going to trigger Sidisi. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you choose a card at random from your graveyard, and if it's a creature, it comes into the battlefield. Otherwise, you put it in your hand. So every single turn, you get a card back. But it's 6 mana. But it's EDH, so 6 mana is not too bad. But it's 6 mana. Anyways, you know how I feel about it. Sultai Ascendancy. You can't run Sidisi without Sultai Ascendancy. The synergy is just too. It's out of this world. Excuse me. Anyways, so it says at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards, put any of them in your graveyard, and put the rest on the back. It's kind of like Scry 2 every turn, but you can trigger Sidisi. It's amazing. It's so good. Tell me if I pronounce this wrong. Grimoire. Oh, it's bad. Grimoire. Nope. Anyways, this you put study counters on it, and then once you get 3 study counters. So if you cast this on turn 5, you can put a study counter on it that turn. 2 turns after, no, yeah, 3 turns after, so you put 2 more study counters on it, and then finally you have to tap it the last time. So once it has 3 study counters, once it has 3 study counters on it, you can tap it, sacrifice it, and then put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. So it is a Rise of the Dark Realms on a 4-drop artifact. Albeit it does take 4 turns after you've played it, at least, to get it. But that's still insane. That's still so good. It creates this pressure in the game, especially if you have 3 study counters and you can just do it at any time. It just creates this intense pressure. You have the power to do this. Anyways, excuse me. Whip of Erebos is great. Gives all your creatures lifelink, but that's secondary. The main thing is that you can whip people back. Whip people back from the graveyard. When this was in standard, man, Colin's little brother, he had this enchantment deck, and it was an enter the battlefield constellation. Well, constellation is enter the battlefield, and just he would whip back these creatures, and all the constellation triggers would go off. If you don't know what constellation is it says when this creature or when this enchantment comes into play, or when other enchantments come into play, this triggers. This ability triggers. So it was just crazy. You'd whip a creature back, and then all this stuff would happen. Oh man! And the problem is that there was not a distinct end game, so he would often go to time at F&Ms on the first game. Anyway, so final card, Jace Memory Adept. He's probably the best Jace at a reasonable price for this deck. And it said his +1, he's a 5-drop for 4 loyalty. His +1 is you draw a card, and then target player puts the top card of his or library into their graveyard. So you just do that on yourself. You just mill yourself one, draw a card. His 0 is target player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, which is also good to target yourself, because why not? You want stuff in the graveyard, and I mean, yeah. And then his ultimate's whatever. You're never gonna use it. But yeah, that is the entire deck. I hope you like it, guys. I'm really excited to finally build it now that I've gotten finally kind of decided a final deck list. But if you have any like amazing ideas that I have to know about, definitely leave them in the comments. And if you have a deck that you want us to try out in a matchup or just do a deck tech for, or like a review, leave the tapped out link in the description, and not the description, excuse me. Leave the tapped out link in the comments. But otherwise, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys.